Welcome to Grave Load. Now, did AMD screw up the launch of the 9600X and the 9700X? I actually think that they did screw it up. Now, overall, I'm not going to make a assessment of the Zen 5 architecture as a whole, right? They still got server CPUs and we still got their higher end SKUs in the Ryzen 9 to be able to assess, which is coming out next week. But to start off here, comparing the 7600X to the 7700X is just too expensive for these processors that are replacing those, right? The 9600X isn't a big enough bump overall. While it may have an IPC increase, in certain applications, it seems, especially the ones that they just try to test for IPC, which is a more of a, server-side application metric. It just does seem that they have that increase of IPC. It's just not translating into what AMD wanted, which is gaming in these processors. And the 9700X and the 9600X just cannot get out of its way to be a big enough benefit. If you're in that AM5 platform already on the 7700 side, it just doesn't make sense for you to go through and upgrade. Now, if you're not on the platform, that's a whole different discussion, and I would actually recommend, later on I'll do this, is that you wait. So these are just too expensive to start out with, right? AMD needs to get pricing a little bit closer to that 7600X and the 7700X where they are now. Granted, their MSRP is lower than when the 7700X and the 7600X launched, but that's not where we're at today. And when you're comparing these processors and you're looking for the review sites, you're going to get a lot of mixed signals here, and that price needs to be coming down. The power efficiency seems to be pretty good, right? It's an 88 watt total board power, I think is what it is, and the TDP is 65 watts, which is impressive. And I'll get into the kind of later on why I think they went that route. I actually think that it is a better move than what everybody thinks, but I could see where they should have at least the 70 or 9700X gave it just about 10 watts more. Now, AMD is not able to lead. We now have defiantly seen this. We can see based upon how they release products and how when they have an advantage, I mean, Intel just throwing out obstacles and you're just tripping over them instead of realizing the obstacle is there and jumping over it and taking the lead, and it's bad. Now this comes from management, and I think it's from CEO down where it needs to be, and those people in leadership, Lisa Su, Mark Papermaster, they need to do a better job on getting this down. I think it's going to have to start with cleaning up some of the marketing side of it. Now, AMD has horrible marketing, right? You should be, not going through and putting all these slides out that are lying. And you could maybe say they weren't lying, whatever else. Now we'll see with the 9950X and the 9900X where they'll sit. But don't overpromise and underdeliver. You got to stop doing that. All companies got to stop doing it. It annoys me to no end. But AMD, the 5900XT was an example of this where you miscompared. Just release the product. Let the people that do reviews review it and say, this is just another product out if you're so incapable of doing something correct. And I'm going to be a little hard on AMD here in the beginning, and it'll be on things I like later on, but I'm annoyed right now with how they kind of release this when I see a pathway to a much better release, and I don't get why nobody even thought of this, and if it was, why it was shot down. They delayed it, this launch, so this should have been stuff that was ironed out and figured out in this process, and I don't get why marketing failed so badly. Even if you give us a lower number and it exceeds what that is, that's a benefit. And just say we're being conservative because we see the minimums here, and that's where we're going to stand on it. And anything else is a benefit. It's a new design. Whatever else, there'd be a lot better reviews of it that it was just a uptick or just a slight pivot here than it is with you trying to overpromise everything. And now we're looking at something like, what did you have before? Why was it so much better here? And so these processors should have had a higher core count. you're going up against Intel here and what they have. I think that you should have started moving that 9600X to 8 cores, the 9700X to 12 cores. If you're not going to have the X3D out right away as you should have, these should have been moving up. You can even start getting rid of the X chips and going just X3D. I think that's another option as well, and make the non-X chips just without X3D on them. Do something like that, AMD. I think that there's movement here. It is getting stagnation. Remember when you came out with Zen 1 and said, the stagnation of everything that Intel was doing? Remember that? Well, AMD, you got to review some of your things that you say in these conferences, because it just looks like mismanagement, at least to me, mismanagement when you start, going over these things that were already there. Now, into the performance side, it's mixed. And I'm wondering if they almost missed some BIOS or microcode for memory, or there's a fix left in there. I mean, we're seeing with Intel with 13th and 14th gen, you can go have something missed for a very long time on just the voltage there. There seems to be a problem with some of the memory stuff. Gamers Nexus had some problems, and Jay's 2 cents had some issues as well with Jay's 2 cents was blue screening, but then all of a sudden it ran fine, which I've seen that before in an AMD processor, and it's rearing its ugly head again, where these are things when you delay them. When you delay a processor on a launch by 2 weeks, these are things that you should be figured out. If you wouldn't have delayed it, I bet you a lot of these would have been annoyances, especially with the Intel stuff, but it would have been swept a little bit more underneath the rug. But you had extra time to test all these processors and everything else to make sure that they all qualified. And when Gamers Nexus gets one, well, I understand a processor may have something wrong with it. It may fail, right? I've had my share of RMAs of processors throughout the history of building PCs, but it still kind of looks bad, especially when they're reviewing. So these should be tested before they go to reviewers to make sure that they're operating within the spec that you are doing. Now, gaming performance was not impressive, like I mentioned, and I don't know where you go from there, how they're going to address that. Maybe these X3D parts are going to be a little bit different here, and I do think that they'll be a little bit more performant, but time will tell to see when they come out. The X3D should have been announced with the release of these. It should have been announced when they're coming out beforehand. The delay needs to stop at this point with X3D. I get AMD wants to release a product a month, or they're trying to go for that. I don't get what the benefit is to doing that. I get you're in the news cycle more often, but what you're doing is that your brand recognition is on the way up, but your support for the brand is on the way down because of stuff like this that you did here with this launch, you did with the 5900 XT. So while the brand is going up and Intel's not doing themselves any favors, you by necessity, by having a product that doesn't need a warning in game saying if you get a crash it's on your processor, you're getting some good publicity. That's not a good business decision in the long run. Now, other workloads seem to be much better. Seems to be more of a data center focused features. Remember, Zen 2 was kind of like that as well, where it was a lot focused on the data center. Power consumption seems to be better. It's a 65 watt part. Now, some people had mix. I wonder if that's with PVO or overclocking or whatever else. But that is something that AMD should probably go and talk to those reviewers and ask them what their settings were, take a look and try to figure out, performance-wise, power-wise, anything like this. Hey, what was the problem, and let's address it. Maybe it's something that they can be addressed. Something you can fix in the future, and something hopefully you'll correct in your test in the future. So I am perfectly okay with reviewers getting a whole bunch of different results, and I think a lot of people hope that every single review is the same. No, they shouldn't be, right? I think a company should just give guidance to a reviewer of here's the product, go and test it, and if the reviewers having issues, there should be like a support or somebody they can talk to there in marketing or whatever else, which tech support on the back end, or tech support directly, something like that, so that they can get help to verify, does this seem right? And if it seems right or not, at least they can come out and hopefully AMD gets a positive, because now there's a different test arena that they can address and be like, okay, well, this is something that we need to look at, maybe in the future, make sure that this doesn't happen again. And then when the video comes out, us, the consumer, can look at it and be like, you know what, in this configuration, I'm seeing this weirdness, and it's in actual review video, and we can, and okay, this is how they fix the weirdness, or AMD is coming out with a fix for the weirdness, or whatever else. But if you just have everyone in unison and all these reviewers, guess what's going to happen is that then people go through and they find and have an issue, and they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense, and they're going around only to find out, if reviewers don't put it in there, that they had the same problem. It's a very frustrating as a consumer for that. So I'm perfectly okay, fine with having this. You know, stability, I talked about the stability a little bit. Now, here's some of the good stuff. I can see where they're going with this product, with Zen 5. Yeah, I see the data center side of it. I see kind of how it's all fitting. I like the chiplet design. I like how that maps across the board. And I think 65 watts is just a little bit too restrictive, but I see where they're going with this. I can see them slotting in that 9800 X3D at, let's say, 95 watts, and then you have the 9700, which is more limited below it. Now, we get the X3D is, usually more powerful in gaming, but if that X3D chip now is more overclockable, just like the 9700X, same clock speeds, boost clock speeds, then is there a need to have have the 9700X at that same wattage? And I don't think so. I think that's kind of where they're slotting in. I think, I think if they just added, this is 75 watt part, a lot of the boosting issues probably would have been fixed. But I can see where they're kind of going with this, and I see their vision for it. At least I hope that's their vision for it, because that's what I'm kind of seeing. But that would have been interesting. Overall, I think that there are workloads here that are going to be able to take quite a bit of advantage to this. You saw where a workload is able to get into this 9700 X, where it can really take off and be performant, even the 9600X, over its predecessors. And that is something where these designs, where it might have not have been as big of a change, but you're trying to rework some pipeline stuff, get to some more instructions where there is a benefit to this. And I would have done the reverse. Me personally, AMD, I think that releasing this is it is what it is at this point, your product. But I think if you would have released the high-end products first, the 9950 and the 9900Xs, I think there would be much of benefit. Now, I do think that the media kind of made their bed with this as well, which is unfortunate. AMD is taking notions from the media and reviewers on this. Remember when that 7800 X3D was delayed, and they had the higher end parts and they didn't perform well for the X3D? Well, now they did the exact opposite, and we're complaining about the same thing. So, but these, you wouldn't have that X3D weirdness and stuff like that. AMD just released the higher end parts. I think with the higher TDP in them, the 170 and 120 watts, they're going to be less limited to these boosting things at the 65 watt TDP, and there's going to be probably a big jump in performance, whereas, or a bigger jump, I should say, not a big as in thing, but bigger jump in performance than what we saw with the 9700X and the 9600X in general. So, one other question I had in this is AMD trying to make the X3D the normal gaming parts? So if you have X3D and you're gaming, this is it. Otherwise, just the X parts are going to be just for normal, people that want to just go, buy a computer, use it, not use it for gaming, maybe do some light gaming, but not be the main driving force. And that's one thought I had. I'd be curious to see of how AMD keeps releasing it. Remember, now we have 3D parts in the 7000 series. If AMD continues stuff like that and maybe even go dual, I'd really like to see dual X3D chiplets on like the 9950X 3D, I think that that would be a really interesting part. In fact, one that I would consider. Zen 6, I think, is going to be, when we're thinking about the next generation, right? We got Zen 5 now, we got Zen 6, right? Well, the interesting thing about this is Zen 6, I think AMD made the decision now to have support through 2027 for the AM5 platform, and that Zen 6 is going to be a part of that. I don't think that AMD can end the AM5 platform on the Zen 5 release. It'll be a really bad taste in people's mouth. One, that they cut the support so short, and then two, especially these two products on Weather Review, were not as big enough uplifts on them, and that's going to be why. And that's maybe why we got, hey, the 2027 is going to be through support. Last time AMD was at, what was it, Computex going through this. So that's something to think about there too, is that they probably already knew a lot of this, and they were just being, the 2077 will give people another upgrade if they're already on the 7700 series. So that's kind of there. The overall, the Zen 5 architecture, I think, is going to be, I like it. It's a change. Now, that's the technical side of me that is looking at this as purely not performance, just on the technical side of what it's capable of doing. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. It looks like on the server side, you start getting to diving into some of these Linux benchmarks of, different server-side applications, and it's really interesting how well this Zen 5 architecture does perform. So there does seem to be a huge uplift in it in certain applications, whereas the gaming doesn't always see this. And I noticed one thing where if there was a wider field of view of applications ran and not just gaming, there seems to be a lot more positive side of it, where if it's just more gaming focused, there was a lot more negative side of things. So it's interesting to see how it was kind of mixed and not and up and down reviews based upon that sort of gated, or how many gaming metrics were in there. So gaming could change. It could change a little bit here and there depending upon what AMD does, or if the game gets an update, or if there's a different way of using an instruction set. But that is where we are. Do I recommend this? I do not recommend this right now. I would get a 7800X 3D for gaming now, and unless you want to wait until a 9800X 3D to see how that performs. Higher core counts will be out in a week, and I'll do another video on that to show what I really think about those. And I'm not going to be drawing too much conclusions on this whole Zen 5. I give you some thoughts, but I really want to see what that 9900X and the 9950X does perform out there. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. I will be sure to read those as well. Thank you so much for watching Gray Overload and help this channel grow. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, God bless.